Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kesha Rogers, and we welcome you to the LaRouche PAC political meeting today. And we have a very exciting discussion for you, but also a very serious discussion in terms of the fight to save the nation and save our republic, which is underway. And Lyndon LaRouche is at the very center of that fight, and our political movement is at the center. So I thank you all for being here today and for joining us both here live and online. I will give an opening in terms of setting the stage for some of the developments that have been underway, and then I will be joined by one of my colleagues, Peter Bowen, who is going to take up the essence of Lyndon LaRouche's understanding of the science of physical economy and economics and what is needed for today to understand how to shift the nation out of the ongoing calamity that we're finding ourselves in into the new paradigm for economic development and prosperity for mankind. So I think it's fitting to title this discussion that we're going to have today, as Mr. LaRouche has, and what is on the cover of our Executive Intelligence Review magazine for this week: Counsel the British System, Save the People. That is what we are out to accomplish. And I'd like to start with a quote by Mr. LaRouche. If you would put up the first slide for me, please. Okay, so as you see here, in the wake of the ongoing attacks and the coup that's escalating against the currently elected president of the United States, President Donald Trump, Lyndon LaRouche said the following: "The American people must demand that the ongoing treasonous British coup against President Trump be stopped and the perpetrators prosecuted and imprisoned. The British Empire must be counseled, and the president must make every effort to save the people of this country and the rest of humanity from further British-directed depredations against their lives. Counsel the British system, save the people." And
one left.
Yeah, I can't see. So that is right now what the LaRouche movement has taken to the streets and to mobilize the American people in strong force to do, to save this nation and save the president and the presidency against this barbaric destruction of our nation that has been ongoing by enemies, both foreign and domestic. And you will, if you look at the recent events that just happened in Charlottesville, Virginia, what has to be understood is that these events were orchestrated events, they were staged events, and to understand this, you have to look at it from the standpoint of the ongoing operation by the enemies of our great republic to continue to push a system of slavery, to keep their British system afloat. And why it's important right now to understand that the only way we're going to free this nation from the grip of this catastrophe that's ongoing, that has been staged by the FBI operations, is by putting an end once and for all to this British Empire and its coup against the presidency. So I'm not quite ready for that yet. So if you want to put that down, then we can. Now, just keep it on. So now, if you want to understand right now why Charlottesville, Virginia has happened, it's important to go back to what our organization exposed just in February of 2017 on the anniversary of the coup in Ukraine that took place just 3 years ago in 2014. And at that time, we published a dossier called, in February 2017, on the third anniversary of the Nazi coup in Ukraine, the LaRouche movement released the following statement that was followed by a 17-page dossier. And the statement was titled, "Are the same people who lied to you about Ukraine also lying to you about Donald Trump?" Now, it's been our ongoing exposure of this destructive force and coup behind the coup in Ukraine, and understanding this, that will set the stage to understanding the ongoing attacks against President Trump. And the attacks against President Trump is coming as a result of the threat being posed by what the real intention of the U.S. and intention and potential of the U.S. joining the new paradigm to shut down this British system and bringing forth a new economic paradigm for cooperation and for the benefit and progress of mankind. That is what is completely freaking out the British Empire. The idea of the United States actually joining with the New Silk Road, Belt and Road Initiative, with mutual cooperation with Russia and China, is something that they have been determined to shut down and to not be allowed to emerge by any cost necessary. So you have what we're in the midst of right now is a fight over the question of slavery and the continued enslavement of mankind versus the idea of what the new paradigm represents, which is to uplift mankind out of a system of slavery, to counsel this British Empire, and to restore a commitment to what our American Republic actually represents, which is a system of anti-slavery. So now what we're seeing is that it's at the very center and the essence of this fight to counsel the British Empire and save the people, as LaRouche said, is this very mission to restore our American Republic. And as we are already seeing that the whole narrative that has been implemented for over a year now, the lies, the media manipulation, the Russiagate story that goes back to 2016 has now been exposed in every way as a fabricated lie. And we'll get into that and into the breaking developments that's happened with that. But the real, as we continue with this discussion right now, we have to realize that the time has come to return to the true cause of the American system. And that is what Lyndon LaRouche has set out to do, and has the key prescription to do so. And LaRouche has made the point in his 4 laws and his dedication over decades that the fight right now is not an internal American political fight. The fight that we're in the midst of right now is a fight to destroy this system of empire and to actually bring the American people the prescription for the restoring of what our republic truly represents. Now, so just to highlight again, as I was starting to state, this statement, I would encourage people to go back and look at this dossier that we put out, and I'll hold this up again. Again, I'll state the title: "Are the same people who lied to you about Ukraine also lying to you about Trump?" And says, "And for the same reason." And I want to read the opening of this introductory statement to that, to give you a sense of how the British operation actually works, and why you can look at the Charlottesville operation, and what emerged there is not a internal political race riots, but this was already planned. It was staged. It was the same type of operation that they planned in Ukraine, because these are the same people who are not happy with the fact that Donald Trump made a commitment not to stop the ongoing regime change policies and war policies. And so now that you've had the exposure by a grouping called the VIPs, Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, to expose the fraud of the Russiagate in a recently released memorandum, this, basically their whole game plan has been backfired and has been thrown back in their face. And this is our Hamiltonian newsletter that we're getting out all across the country in mass, in exposing this fraud. And as we speak right now, representatives of the VIPs, Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, are actually addressing our meeting, both our meeting in Manhattan. You have both leading intelligence professionals, Bill Binney and Ray McGovern. Now, in February, on the anniversary of the Nazi coup in Ukraine, we published the following. You, like most Americans, have been systematically lied to about what happened in the so-called Maidan color revolution. And these same lies are now being used to feed a national hysteria against Putin and Russia, which risked World War III. The narrative, the now fashionable word for government lying, is that Russia annexed Crimea and occupied eastern Ukraine because Putin is a ruthless bad actor, and was seeking to crush a people's power rebellion. That narrative turns reality upside down and inside out. Lyndon LaRouche's Executive Intelligence Review magazine was on the ground during the events of the Maidan and reported exactly what happened. Today, February 22nd, 2017, EIR released, and this is at the time of the report, released a 17-page special report and case study, which proves that the truth is the opposite of the concocted narrative. The EIR dossier thoroughly documents how Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton's State Department staged the colored revolution, culminating in the February 22nd, 2014 coup, using neo-Nazi groupings with lineage dating back to World War II, assisted by George Soros's Open Society networks and the National Endowment for Democracy, an asset of American and British intelligence services. This was done as a part of a new Cold War destabilization against Russia, aimed at precluding a potential United States, China, and India and Japan alliance of economic development for the entire world. So that opening gives you an understanding of and causes you to have to think about how the same George Soros operations, the same British Obama-led operations for a continuation of regime change and war that has now been exposed as they perpetrated the lie going over 1 year now, that the currently elected president of the United States, Donald Trump, was in collusion with Russia has now been exposed. So what do you think they're going to do? They want to create a situation where they divide this nation up, create complete hysteria, and actually stop the progress of having the type of new shift toward a new paradigm actually emerge. So now, over the course of the entire time that Trump has been president of the United States, which has been a very short period of time, since the very beginning, what we called or exposed as the blips, the British liberal imperialist system, which was the first exposure that we published in our executive intelligence review, written by Barbara Boyd, and many people in here may have read this article. If you haven't actually read the article, I'd encourage you to go back and take a look at it, because this article came about, it's entitled "The Insurrection Against the President, or Who Really Is George Soros Anyway?" Now, her article, Barbara Boyd is a member of and researcher with the LaRouche Political Organization. Her article details in full the coup against the president underway, which has been ongoing, and the key evil players in that whole operation and plot against the president. Now, at the same time, or very shortly before she published this report, people may remember, or you may have actually got wind of, at the very day after President Trump was inaugurated, the London Spectator put out the following article, which was the launching pad for the ongoing calls for assassination of the President of the United States right now. And that article that they put out on January 21st was titled, headline, "Will Donald Trump be assassinated, ousted in a coup, or just impeached?" Question mark. As the president-elect takes office, all Washington can talk about is how badly it will end. So this is the day after the inauguration of the President of the United States. So what has been the crime of President Donald Trump? Why has he become public enemy number one to the British Empire? Well, I think it's important to look at what Trump has actually been calling for, his emphasis on what Linda LaRouche knows very well and knows best. In recent discussions going back just several months ago, when President Trump was actually touring the country with Make America Great Again rallies, vowing to restore our economic progress and commitment to reindustrializing the country, he attended a number of rallies and you can really say that President Trump has been the first president known to us right now in 100 years to advocate for the American system economic policies in the tradition of the American system economists and statesmen such as Henry Clay, Abraham Lincoln, Alexander Hamilton, names of which he actually pronounced in his own speeches in recent periods. So I actually wanted to give a quote from one of the speeches here, which is the speech that he made in Louisville, Kentucky at Freedom Hall in Louisville, Kentucky. And so let me get my little quote here. He said, "We're in the heartland of America, and there is no place I would rather be than here with you tonight. Our first Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, was born right here in Kentucky. That's not bad. The legendary pioneer, Daniel Boone, helped settle the Kentucky frontier. And the great 19th century American statesman, Henry Clay, represented Kentucky in the United States Congress. Henry Clay believed in what he called the American system and proposed tariffs to protect American industry and finance, American infrastructure. Clay was a fierce advocate for the American manufacturing. He wanted it badly. He said very strongly, free trade, which would throw wide open the ports to foreign production without duties, while theirs remains closed to us. That was his quote. He knew all the way back early 1800s. Clay said that free trade must be fair, equal, and reciprocal. Boom, he said, fair, equal, and reciprocal. I'm talking about reciprocal trade, reciprocal. In explaining his American system, Clay argued that the sole objective of the tariff is to tax the produce and remember to tax the produce of foreign industry with the view of promoting American industry. So this is directly what, and it goes on, and actually you can get this. These are the reports, and it's good to remind yourself about this. We actually republished President Trump's speeches, including the speech of March 15th, President Trump's speech at the American Center for Mobility, Willow Run, Michigan, the one I just quoted from, the March 20th, President's speech, Make America Great Again rally, Freedom Hall, Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky. You had March 21st, President Trump's speech to the National Republican Congressional Committee dinner, National Building Museum, Washington, D.C., and so forth and so on. And these speeches can be found in an article published in EIR by Robert Ingram, On the Cusp of a New World, the Import of President Trump's Forced Recent Interventions. So now I wanted to read that because at the very time when the President Trump, right after he gave his remarks about the incidents that took place in in Charlottesville, Virginia, the media went on a complete tirade. And the interesting thing about this is that people may not even know, because most of it's been cut out, that at the time that the media went on a total tirade and to call this president a racist, Nazi sympathizer, and so forth, and you had President Barack Obama, former President Barack Obama, and others, talking about hypocrites, when these are the same people President Barack Obama had a kill list every Tuesday to kill people, and secondly, was actually orchestrating behind the coup, as we were just discussing, in Ukraine. He and Hillary Clinton vowed to continue to keep the Nazi coup going, and not only that, to keep the regime change policy, the war policy, and the policy of the British for annihilation of the world going. And they want to talk about love and peace and happiness and call Trump a Nazi sympathizer. And anybody who is falling for this has to be slapped across the face. And I mean, I think this is a very important discussion we're having here, and what I'm saying, because I'm sitting here as an African American female in the South, talking to an audience here about President Donald Trump and recognizing that this has to stop in our country right now. And this is a very serious matter. I'm not up here just to give a nice speech. We're up here because in the South, we have to make a breakthrough that we're going to actually restore the entire Union, as President Abraham Lincoln understood, for the progress to free every single person from this nation from slavery. And you have to realize that the slavery is not coming from the President of the United States of America right now. The slavery is coming from the British Empire that Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton are stooges of. So that's where we're at. And you just think about when Trump was just recently speaking on restoring our nation's industry and productivity of job creation and infrastructure. And I watched this speech, it was almost unbearable. It was completely insane in terms of how the media reacted. And so the media said, or Trump said, can I take questions after giving a speech on how we have to bring the nation together, and said that the way you're going to stop the racial disparities in the nation right now is through jobs. People want jobs. You can unify the nation around jobs, around economic development. And what did they say? They said, you're a Nazi sympathizer, you're a racist, you're this, you're that. This is the media. They were going off. They said, we don't care what you have to say. Trump said, does anybody want to actually talk about economic development, talk about infrastructure, about the subject that I was actually discussing, that he was actually discussing? Yeah, we'll talk about it. It's not going to work because you're a Nazi sympathizer and blah, 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 blah. And you're just like, these people, our nation is gone completely insane. And the best option that we have right now to turning this thing around and stopping this coup, which is very strong in the media, which is very strong, both Democrats and Republicans. This is not about the Democrat or Republican. This is about the fact that the British Empire believes that they can continue to manipulate the American people and manipulate our American system into going along and defending their system of slavery and their system of empire. And this is what has to be stopped. So, hold on, I got a little excited here, so I lost it. But give me a second here. So put the next. Okay, so just to go back to this again, many people have heard from our publications, from the LaRouche PAC, once this very hard-hitting dossier exposing the fraud of this Russiagate, of the so-called Russian hacks, as really a leak that came from a letter that was sent by representatives of the VIPs, as I said before, and I believe there's over 21 plus signatures of those representatives on that. That was actually picked up first in Consortium News, which the title of their publication and article was Intel Vets Challenge Russian Hack Evidence. And I would just say, if people haven't had a chance, this is on our website, and we published the entire VIPS memorandum, not only on the website, we also have it in our latest publication. And this was the cause of Lyndon LaRouche and our organization instituting the latest petition on our website, and this dossier and the letter that was sent to Trump that exposes the whole Russiagate scandal as not hacks, but actually leaks that were done from the inside, and the whole idea that the Democratic Party, DNC, the Democratic National Committee computers were hacked by Russian operatives from abroad, has now been completely exposed and deposed with forensic evidence. And now this is the thing that has caused the total explosion to happen right now, where the British Empire is saying, oh, we've been caught red-handed, we better create some kind of hysteria. And so now this is picked up. It was first picked up, like I said, in Consortium, then it was picked up in Salon magazine, and The Nation picked it up. And this was an article by a guy by the name of Patrick Lawrence. As you see, The Nation titled it, "A New Report Raises Big Questions About Last Year's DNC Hack. Former NSA experts say it wasn't a hack at all, but a leak, an inside job by someone with access to the DNC system." So again, the evidence is there. The enemy has been caught red-handed. They have nowhere to go. You can't put the genie back in the bottle, as they say. And this thing is the cat's out of the bag, that this was an ongoing perpetrated lie. And the reality is now, oh, we can't actually promote that lie any longer. So we got to move on to another one. Oh, you know how to get people whipped up? Well, racism. They get all emotional around racism and so forth, even if it's orchestrated and constructed by an enemy that you're not even being told. And so the key thing right now is we have to put a stop to this coup for the sake of humanity and to save this presidency, because if you understand what's at stake right now, this is far beyond internal U.S. politics. So I'm going to encourage everybody again. We have the petition, which you can find on our website, which says President Trump investigate British subversion of the USA, sign, and then it's calling for people to sign the petition. And just so people will know how this petition starts off, this is no sugarcoating petition of, you know, we like the president, sign here. This is a petition that says we're out to destroy the enemies of this nation, which is the British Empire. So, and that's the number one fight. The petition actually starts off, it's very short. I want to read the beginning to you. It says, Lyndon LaRouche has stated that with respect to the ongoing fraudulent Russiagate scandal directed at President Trump, quote, the American people must demand that the ongoing treasonous British coup against the presidency and the nation itself be stopped and the perpetrators prosecuted and imprisoned. We, the undersigned, agree with that statement and with the following. And then it goes on to say, number one, the veteran intelligence professionals for sanity, VIPS, has presented evidence to President Trump that Russia never hacked the Democratic National Committee. The emails in question were leaked by the insider and hacked, and were subsequently altered to attribute responsibility to Russia. A new special prosecutor should be appointed to investigate those responsible for perpetrating and perpetuating the resulting hoax, which has so damaged divided our entire nation. Thank you. Somebody realized I'm going down. I'm going down. Light on. So, okay. So, and it goes on from there. It's very short, and people, I'm assuming that everybody in this room, I don't have to actually, I don't want to insult your intelligence by sitting here reading this to you, because I know you already read it yourselves and actually have about 50 signatures of people who you've gotten to sign on it. So again, get this out there. We're calling it taking the Russiagate challenge. So now there's a couple of things I want to just end with here, conclude with, which I want to bring this back around to the continuation of our discussion for today on how we put an end to this system of empire. But first of all, you actually have to understand what the American system, our republic, was defined in the interest and actually organized and established in the interest of freeing mankind from slavery. And I wanted to, let's put up the emancipation. So this is a statue erected in, it's called Lincoln Park, and it's called Emancipation. And
What city?
DC.
Oh. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, that's it's in Lincoln Park. And you have well, I know this is where this quote comes from, that when it was actually unveiled, that this quote is from Frederick Douglass, and Frederick Douglass can be really seen as the fighter for, as a former slave, the fighter for freedom, for emancipation, was actually one of the first slaves to actually learn how to read and write, and became a world-renowned citizen of the world, and has fought for freedom and emancipation for every single person. But I wanted to put this up here because in the wake of the Charlottesville attacks going on, you've seen a number of other ongoing operations that have been run, and you know that this was a staged and a set-up event, when it doesn't really have to do with trying to stop the taking down of statues of Confederate soldiers. It's really an operation coming from the British Empire, because now you have people who are all over the media, all over Facebook and other places, that are now perpetuating the line and the lie that our founding fathers, particularly Abraham Lincoln, was an owner of slaves, and that he was perpetuating the slave policy, slave trade, and he never wanted to emancipate the slaves. And this is going out, and they actually are starting to deface and defame statues of Lincoln and so forth. And so now the whole thing has gotten completely hysterically out of control. And I think it's important to look at what Frederick Douglass, in his oration in memory of Abraham Lincoln, had to say.
Who was he speaking to when he gave this speech here?
In Washington D.C. at a memorial inauguration, or a memorial ceremony of Lincoln, and this was about 5 years after, and this was an audience of both freed slaves and whites at the same time, and he says, and I'd encourage people to read this entire speech, because I really don't think it does justice to take a quote from it, because at the same time, he develops the fight that was going on, and how Lincoln was being pulled all different types of ways, where you had on the one side the abolitionists who were saying you're not moving quick enough, just cancel slavery and immediately move to free everybody and so forth. And then you had obviously the slave system that was saying, basically threatening his life and threatening that their system was going to be kept afloat. But as I said again, this was never just a North versus South. You had to recognize that at the same time, the British played a very critical role in their defense and protection of the Confederate system and of the slave system. And this is what Lincoln was taking on. This is what really Lincoln was vowing to put an end to, was that British system. And it was really, you could see that documented and expressed in the writing of Henry Carey in his Harmony of Interest, who was a great associate of Lincoln, called the Harmony of Interest, when he talks about two systems before the world, the American system versus the British system. And people should take a look at that. But again, what Douglas goes through in this very extensive speech is the power of Abraham Lincoln in terms of what he truly represented for the freedom and interest of mankind, and knowing that the only way that you're going to get that freedom, that true freedom in the United States, is by unifying the nation and the republic and preserving the union, if you will. And so the quote reads, "Though Mr. Lincoln shared the prejudices of his white fellow countrymen against the Negro, it is hardly necessary to say that in his heart of hearts he loathed and hated slavery. The man who could say, 'Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war shall soon pass away. Yet if God wills it continue till all the wealth piled by 200 years of bondage shall have been wasted, and each drop of blood drawn by the lash shall have been paid for by one drawn by the sword. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether." End quote. That's quoting from Lincoln. And he says, Douglas says, gives all needed proof of his feelings on the subject of slavery. He was willing, while the South was loyal, that it should have its pound of flesh because he thought it was so nominated in the bond. But further than this, no earthly power could make him go. That's actually cutting off from what the rest of the quote is that I wanted to read, but I can share that with people a little later. But I wanted to put that up there because, and this actual statue has gotten a lot of attack and targeting also, all different types, and Peter and I were just talking about this, by those proponents of slavery and so forth. And what the statue is Lincoln has his hand on the Book of Emancipation, and at the top there, you can't really see it so well. And then he's actually lifting the slave up out of slavery and really pointing to the future for the freedom of mankind. And, just saying that, recognizing that every single human being has the creative potential to create their own future and to actually bring about a future that is going to spark the creative potential, the God-given creative potential of every human being. And there's many writings that, if you go and look at Lincoln, that really indicate his true love for mankind, for every single human being. And most of the people who are promoting otherwise need to go and learn how to read, one thing, and actually realize the people who are promoting these evil policies and division are acting on behalf of the British Empire. Now, somebody cut the light on for me real quick so I can see where I'm at here. So I want to just, before we go into the discussion of the fight to end this empire that Lyndon and Helga LaRouche have been in the midst of, as we've really gotten a sense of right here, because this has been, again, the title of this discussion is Council of the British Empire, Save the People. And that the way that we're going to do that was really expressed, and there's one more slide there. In this article that was released just a day or so ago called Identifying with China. And this article actually details the decades-long fight for Lyndon and Helga LaRouche in the fight for the Belt and Road Initiative, which is called the New Silk Road, or the Belt and Road Initiative, which has now been taken up by China. And what those pictures show here are Helga LaRouche in discussion with China Daily in the interview that they write up about her. And on the bottom here to your left, you have Helga LaRouche in her recent trip to China for the Belt and Road Forum that took place on May 14th and 15th, 2017. And then you have to the far left over there the picture of Helga LaRouche at the age of 23 years old on her first trip to China, when she went to China and really traveled around the world, visiting countries in Africa and then ending up in Asian countries. And this is where she and later joining, made her commitment that her fight was to end the system of slavery, of poverty that had been ongoing by the British Empire to keep the whole system going throughout Africa, the very system that President Abraham Lincoln and then followed by President Franklin Roosevelt vowed to end. And that the article actually talks about Helga and Lyndon LaRouche's decades-long fight for ending poverty throughout the world, ending slavery throughout the world, and economic disparities throughout the world through the development of the Eurasian land bridge, economic cooperation, peace through economic development. And in the article, it talks about Helga LaRouche was, it quotes Helga and said she was very excited when President Xi Jinping unveiled the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI, in 2013. The BRI, which was the Belt and Road Initiative, which was then known as the Silk Road Economic Belt, and the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road, is a development strategy proposed by Xi to focus on connectivity and cooperation between the countries. The article then goes on to say, and this is very interesting, the Schiller Institute, which Helga Zepp-LaRouche is a founder of, also has sponsored conferences in cities across the U.S. and San Francisco, Detroit, New York, promoting the Belt and Road and urging the U.S. to participate. It says, unlike the Obama administration, which was more resistant to the Chinese initiatives of the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, or AIIB, and the BRI, U.S. President Donald Trump has put infrastructure construction atop his agenda and sent an interagency delegation led by Matthew Pottinger, a National Security Council senior director for East Asia, to the Beijing Forum. That's the forum that I was just showing you the picture that Helga was in. So, and the article ends with Helga LaRouche saying, we're happy, we are very happy. It is one thing for a small organization like ours to produce ideas, but it's a quite different thing that the largest country in the world started to do it. And this is what we're seeing right now. And that China is now taking up the ideas of Lenin and Helga LaRouche for decades to defeat this system of empire and actually move with the system of economic development and cooperations for the creative progress of every single human being in all nations. And I would just say to President Donald Trump and to anyone who wants to defend the beauty of this nation for all people, regardless of what your race is, you actually have to put an end to this system of empire. That President Trump should take up LaRouche's call and his initiative right now to counsel the British Empire to actually investigate into this fraud of the Russiagate that has now been exposed, and to, most importantly of all, to bring the United States into this new economic cooperation and alliance of the Belt and Road, New Silk Road Initiative. First steps have been taken toward that. The meeting with President Xi Jinping in Florida in Mar-a-Lago, the meeting with President Putin in after the G20 summit, and the continued vowing to end this whole system of regime change and war has to be kept up. But there has to be an understanding right now that this fight is not going to be won without taking on the enemy directly, and to stop what we have seen as travesties that has stuck with the American people, and really people who saw the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King, all of these assassinations done by the hand of the British Empire with their tools in the FBI operations, has left our country in total devastation now for decades. That now we're at a point where, look at the young people of this nation, people younger than myself, under 40 years old, under 20 years old, the drug epidemics that is now just ravaging throughout our country right now, the economic disparities. All of these things can be fixed if we commit ourselves to end this system of empire and actually understanding, as LaRouche does, what the commitment toward human progress really must become. So with that, I will have Peter come up and continue the discussion about how LaRouche understands this commitment of human progress.
Microphone.
Oh, great.
What I want to do today is ask you a whole bunch of questions. The issue that we're faced with is how are we going to take the potential we have and turn it into a world that is growing in the way the Chinese have started to do with Africa? And how are we going to do that? And how are we going to make it work? And the way Mr. LaRouche put the problem forward recently, actually not recently, this was back in 2006, I believe. He wrote the article, The Lost Art of the Capital Budget. And it's an extensive discussion of how the United States might act to lead the world out of the mess it's in. So, well, my thought here is not to try to go over that article, which is quite long and involves a lot of historical issues, scientific issues and other things that would require several hours to even begin to seriously discuss it, right? I mean, it's just, there's too much in it. So the whole idea of having a capital budget is what we want to think about here. That's what I wanted to ask you guys to think on. What is this capital budget? And oh, thanks. What we all know we're faced with is a problem of rebuilding our country, not just patching. That's what the issue is now. Can we have the first thing there? Here we've got it's hard to see this, but this is the backup in the subway system in New York, right? It's all jammed up. They constantly have delays, lots of fires in the tunnels. It's a mess. The Sulaks, which if they were to shut down in northern Michigan, 11% of our national economy would stop. And the locks are so bad they hardly dare close them. I mean, it's a mess.
So what are those?
This is in Sault Ste. Marie in northern Michigan.
And it goes to where?
It's a 21-foot drop from Lake Superior down to Lake Huron. And it used to be rapids, and you'd have to portage around. You'd have to carry your boat up around the rapids. And then in the 1800s, they dug the locks and started allowing ships to move. And the thing that's really has been important, not so much as it was when it got started, but is iron ore. The iron ore up in northern Minnesota and Michigan was the richest deposit in the world until they found the mountain in Brazil. So that was the means by which all this ore was brought down for processing in what became our railroads. And
when were these locks built and finished?
I don't know the exact dates on when they were built and finished. I mean, they've been around for more than 100 years. Does anybody know what the dates are? But that's something that needs to be repaired, right? It needs to be repaired. The subway system needs to be repaired. But if we just repair them, are we going to be able to move into the future? Are we going to be able to do what needs to get done for the future? And then, of course, water. We need water. We need these problems. Not these problems. We have the problems. We need the solutions, right? We need that. And not only here, but if you go to the next slide.
What are these locks called again? I'm sorry, the name.
The Sulaks, S-O-O locks.
Sulaks. Okay.
Yeah, and I don't exactly know how they got that name. But speaking of infrastructure, this would be the greatest infrastructure project mankind's ever undertaken to move water. The Trans-Aqua, which Mr. and Mrs. LaRouche have been promoting for decades. And the reason being that this is what Lake Chad used to look like. And now it looks like that. And it's going to look a lot smaller. Now, what one of the studies in looking at this, they understood that Lake Chad has dried out before, before the last couple hundred years. It's gone through cycles. They don't know why it dried out, but it dried out. And so it's not, the point is it has nothing to do with human activity in the area. That's not what's causing the problem. But it is drying out. And so how are we going to solve it? We'll bring a lot of water from the Congo, take the tributaries that I think are from this yellow part here, and divert them up there. Anyway, that's a huge project, and it will cost tens of billions of dollars. And China's right now participating in a sort of reawakening of the feasibility study. Now, the thing that Lynn makes a point about is how are we going to do this? So why should we do it? And that's what I want to ask people. Why should we do this? Why should we fix the subway system in New York? Why should we build a Transaqua, fix the Sulaks? Why do we want to do it? What's the idea?
The idea shouldn't be to continue a 19th century city in the shape of a 19th century city. You should be looking into the future, right? When you do things like this, I mean, you shouldn't be looking at like one of the needs that we had for a subway system in 1950, but like, what are we going to need, like in 2050 or
yeah,
2100, right? It's like, you should look to the future. It's like things like steel. I mean, I'm all for steel where you need it, right? But I mean, we should also be looking at carbon fiber and graphene, and things which, like why is the typical small car of this year 1,000 pounds heavier than the typical small car of 1955 or 1965? What's wrong with that picture, right? Make things affordable. I saw a terribly interesting article here.
Well, hold on. Before we go into the details like that, the issue here is why? To what end are we trying to get a futuristic city? What's our intention? What's behind the drive for this?
So we can go beyond where we are now for civilization, not just our local population, but for humankind. Great projects that bring us into the future so humankind can expand. Right.
That's right. And it's the kind of thing that Ted's talking about here is that it's an advance in science that we're looking for, right? We're looking for an advance in science so that mankind can go forward. And that process is, well, we want to know, we have to have a scientific method that allows us to know whether it's going to work or not, how it's going to work. And the thing that, well, what would Wall Street say about it? What would Wall Street say about?
What are they saying?
Yeah.
The profit is in that.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Where's the profit?
Money over that.
Yeah, right. Where's the profit? Where's the profit? And that's what they're doing. And Lynn is, he made a breakthrough, back in the 50s, and he focuses on on the growth of per capita per square kilometer output. That's the thing that he's looking at. How do you make that grow? And what kind of scientific method allows you to be able to engender that? And it leads to problems for us to figure out. And one of the things is that why doesn't Congress just read this stuff and implement it? You know, I mean, I don't know how many times I've heard that we've met with congressmen and they agree with us. And then they don't do anything. What is it do you think that's holding them back?
We don't give them $2,000 a day for the next campaign.
Yeah, right. That's what they got to raise, right? That's the average, right? $2,000 a day. That's
Well,
what they
sometimes it's pressure and pressure political forces that have the ideology of the system that's against the American system, which is austerity, profit comes first, and credit and expansion doesn't come at all. And they have pressures, political pressures telling them, sorry, that's, you know, we're going to do things to you if you are going with that ideology of growth, pro-growth.
Right.
So there's different specific pressures that they have. Sometimes it's, we're not giving you money. Our organization gives you a lot of money, you're not going to get it. And sometimes it's, we might expose your sex life, or we might assassinate you.
Well, yeah, those kinds of things. Yeah, Ron?
Well, I think the Chinese article that Kesha showed a little earlier, and their description of Helga's early years and this trip she took to China, and the fact that what she saw in Africa and in China, the state of the world and the need to create the institutions, or at least the power to change it. There's a question of identity. What do people measure that actually causes them to move on anything, whether it's a fixation on making money or whether it's actually a human identity? And coming out of that trip and coming back to Europe, she bumped into the Rush's organization and joined it. But what Lynn, with a similar earlier mission, had taken up is, what is the principle that, you know, allows us now to fix what should have been fixed coming out of World War II? And so this principle measurement of relative potential population density that Lynn goes after and hammers, what's really interesting to answer that question, it lies in this level of human creativity, which has nothing to do with what most people would say is economic, but it's the only way you can feed and develop the kinds of projects you're talking about. So the measurement is a real human, not only identity, but then a mission orientation and a morality to pull it off. And I think what the Chinese picked up, both in relating Helga's history and Lynn's history, and what we all have identified with in our own fights here, and what the population now in the United States has to do, is pick that up. Mike was using an effective polemic when we went to the union meeting yesterday of basically saying, what's the difference between, you know, the Chinese economic policy and the American policy? And the answer obviously being they have the insight and the courage to listen to LaRouche. And yeah. So this principle in this identity and the mission orientation is missing in other people. It's missing in a Wall Street leader. They haven't got a human identity. They have a predator.
Yeah. Well, I think that's true, and it actually shows up in the way they view development. Because look at China, right? When Nixon went over there, and what did they negotiate? They negotiated the use of the cheapest labor in the world, and that was how they were going to succeed. And for them, what was success? Well, success was making a lot of money, pay people nothing, and get something, and you get huge profits out of it. And what Lynn says, I think we can go to the next slide. Actually, this is just when you're talking about having the wrong policy. So here's in 1990, this was the state of productive employment. You know, people putting out physical product. This is these are the counties that were engaged in physical output of product.
in Ohio.
In Ohio, this is just in Ohio.
One's in the dark color or?
The
Yeah,
darker it
yeah.
is, the more they produce.
Right? And then down here, which is, you know, what, 13 years later, the dark, this one here has gained in productive employment by 35%. These two here have gained by 10 to 35%. These guys, there's no change. And then everything else is 10 to 60% loss of productive employment. And so there's something wrong with the policy, right? If that happens, don't you think? I mean, that you might think that's kind of an obvious thing, that something's wrong with the policy. And when we took those factories and we moved them out to China, it increased profits, didn't it? Okay. Well, now go to the next slide. In fact, this practice, sometimes called outsourcing, actually lowered the net physical productivity per capita of the world as a whole. More of the world's net productivity per capita and per square kilometer was actually lost in North America and Europe, for example, than was gained in Asia.
How do you explain that?
That's the interesting thing, right? Is that what's happened is what you're taking a modern productive technology and moving it from power grids, water supply, sewage systems, educational systems, healthcare systems, and other so-called infrastructure, or the platform from which production takes place. And you're taking it out of that and putting it into a place where water systems are intermittent, power is generally unavailable, healthcare systems are almost non-existent, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So by taking that productivity, the workforce, taking that intensity of production away from the workforce in the United States and putting it into a cheap labor environment with a very low level platform from which to operate, that overall the output capacity per capita per square kilometer of the populations goes down. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it also relates back to Kesha's presentation, you know, of the inefficacy of slavery. You know, that, you know, it was not a good economic system ever.
Right. Now, what's, if you think back, you don't have to go back to it, but think back to the thing on Ohio. There's a policy that wasn't working, right? That's the free trade policy. That's the NAFTA policy. That's, you know, whatever. That's the policy that just wasn't working. Well, now, what has the United States done when its policies don't work?
Listen to Wall Street.
Yeah, right. And Wall Street says, oh, they work, right?
They make money.
We made money.
Do it more.
Do it more. Exactly. Exactly. Go to the next slide now. Do it more.
Yes, go ahead.
I think the problem is in the principle of every elected official. Because, for example, we know the platform from Mr. LaRouche, but if they don't carry in their agenda at least the principle, it's not gonna succeed. It's not gonna work. Doesn't matter how they turn around, they're trying to recreate or reinvent the wheel. They get lost in the process, and nothing gets done, and we are falling behind and behind and behind.
Are you saying then that the principle of progress is lost? Is that
no, the principle, for example, every citizen quitting or daily doing during the life, we carry principles, you know, do better for us, God first, and country, family, things like that. Many, plus, in our cases, the policies of Mr. LaRouche. None of the congressmen that I know carry not one little bitty thing of the platform of Mr. LaRouche.
Right.
So they have an idea of Democratic idea or Republican idea, plus their own. And as soon as they get in power, they move everything around and they focus on their own, plus on the special interests that are supporting them.
Right. That's right. Now, here's when we, as what Diane was saying, that we do more of what we've been doing, right? This is the way Lynn put it. It says, the fault lies thus chiefly not in the legislators' lack of sufficient information, but in the legislators' rejection of information, which is seen as contrary to the beliefs which have already been ruining us over the recent 35 or more years to date. Like the man who persists in attempting to impregnate a plastic dummy. The harder they believe, the more disgusting the results of their performance becomes. So Lynn is, pretty clearly pointing to a problem in thinking. It's a problem in thinking. And it's a problem that we see in Charlottesville. In fact, I was this weekend. I had a little fun. I started a post on Ann Coulter's site in her forum. She has a forum. So I put a series of links up about the coup d'etat against President Trump. And anyway, I got one reply back to one of the links who actually had gone to look at last night's website, webcast, last night's webcast. And the guy, what he said, I think it's a guy, what he said was that, you're trying to make this event into something that is part of a larger schema that is controlling it. And I don't go for that kind of thing. So I turned it off. Right? I mean, that's the kind of problem that we've got in this, and people don't think. They don't look for how do you get to the point where you can actually know what you're doing is correct. And so the thing that let's see, what's the next slide there? Oh, well, this is just Lynn making clear what we've got to do. He says, moreover, the choice of the kind of physical science practice needed requires close attention to the special set of underlying assumptions which are specific to the relevant behavioral characteristics of the human mind. Now that's a mouthful. Because what I want you to think about and make suggestions as to what do you think the assumptions are that underlie our thinking on this question of infrastructure, of a capital budget, of being able to get our country set so we can build into the future. What are underlying assumptions? What are the assumptions that we're making?
One of the assumptions you're making is that people are going to want to go on living in cities like Washington, D.C., New York, Baltimore into the future, right? Whereas the country isn't really working that way anymore. It's like, you've got like this huge Deloitte building up there where I used to work, like in Vienna, Virginia, Tyson's Corner, right? Huge building, it says Deloitte on it. It's a major government contractor, right? The hundreds of contractors involved in one kind of technology that I was working with. At any rate, this building, you would walk into it on most days of the month, it's going to be mostly empty. It's just going to be empty chairs and empty. The people there are working with the combination of live meeting and GoToMeeting and airplanes, right? And Google Hangouts and things of that nature, Skype. And they're mostly living in small towns, like Victoria, Texas, or Cuero, Texas. The country doesn't, the only thing that you really have in the country anymore where people really have to be in one place is a factory, right? Every other kind of business is working the way I just described, or starting to work the way I just described. And I don't think you really need places like New York City anymore, Boston. So you're gonna have to think about like who really needs to be working where.
Okay, well, that's.
Whoops, millions of people just wiped out.
Yeah, right.
I didn't say wiped out, I said spread across the countryside.
Yeah, right.
And look, you could put the whole human population of the world in Texas right now, and it wouldn't be that crowded. I mean, you don't realize how big a place Texas is until you start driving around in it, right?
Yeah.
Of course, the wonderful thing I wanted to say about cities is if it is properly organized, and I think we've not followed that up appropriately, but of course is that you have culture, you have science, you have museums, which, that should be an attraction that would cause people to want to make these cities work, because it is a capability that you can't find in the countryside.
It's a hub.
Working transportation systems,
Right.
which should be working transportation systems.
No, but like the place that I'm used to, which is the Washington, D.C. area, I mean, it's home to me. I know it like the palm of my hand. I'm in the whole, the East Coast, right? I mean, the Mid-Atlantic area. I couldn't recommend it to anybody anymore. Your whole life is dominated by dealing with traffic. You've got people, you've got people that are working 8 or 9 hour jobs, right, and then spending another 4 hours a day driving.
Right.
That's no way to live.
No, that's no way to live.
Well, I think that the idea here about the underlying assumption, right, is to get at something a little bit more, less material. We want to get to a kind of assumption that's driving us to want to develop New York City properly. What's driving us to want to have a water supply for the United States that meets its needs? What drives us to want to work with the nations of Africa? What is that? What's that underlying assumption?
What is a human being?
It's the need.
What is a human being?
The need.
The need. Right.
That's what drives us, most of us.
And it's
when
the
I
need.
go to my table, I need to go to work.
For the immediate survival of physical.
But it's not just
Things.
the need. Human beings don't have to care about other human beings. They don't have to help Africans. And they don't even have to help people in the other part of the country. So it has to be a higher principle than need.
No, but I think it's the problem. What makes, in my opinion, what makes anything stronger, bigger, is union and getting along. I mean, that's the key. The United States were, when they create a union, they were the stronger. European country after World War II, after socialism and communism, and everything opened up, they decided to create the European Union. That makes them stronger. Their currency was much stronger. Now that Brittany separates, it's falling apart because France wants to do the same thing. The Brits are falling apart completely. So union is the key, and all of us getting along with each other.
Brian, you had an idea?
Well, I think it's interesting to think about China.
Yeah.
I mean, Nixon went there in 1972. The opening up of China. And Deng Xiaoping had been there since 19 Well, he came in 1978. And so, what unfolded? The Wall Street and the City of London, the British Empire had one intention in terms of China. But China, if we can speak of the nation as a whole, certainly its leaders had a different concept, which is we've come to understand more clearly is tied up with their term for something we know as agape, which is Ren, which means love of humanity. And while while Lin was absolutely right in saying that moving this, this platform of capital-intensive industrial production, manufacturing, and so forth, and moving it to cheap production areas, in and of itself was a loss of total net world productivity. China instead took that opportunity under the leadership of Deng Xiaoping and others, who had learned from the disaster of the Cultural Revolution, and turned the whole thing inside out. I mean, they took this opportunity to not just produce for the West in terms of cheap goods, but they adopted a capital program, a capital-intensive system, exactly of the type that Lynn's talking about in the paper that you're bringing forward, and have transformed themselves, as we all know, into the leading nation in the world, in turn, not just for themselves, but for other nations, and really inspired their own people and others. And that concept of Ren is Confucian. I mean, that's not just Confucius himself. That whole tradition that informed their outlook, and it certainly made the ideas of LaRouche, Lin, and Helga something that they could access. They could respond to, because they were already predisposed to think of those potentials, not just negatively in terms of overcoming the Mao and the Cultural Revolution, but affirmatively and from the standpoint of a deeper sense, which touches on what you were raising a moment ago. They had a sense of union. What is it going to take to hold the nation together and develop? And so I think that goes to also answering your question. Obviously, as in the case of Lincoln, as in the case of Martin Luther King, in the case of our other great leaders, they not only had that quality themselves, like Ren or agape, but they mobilized it in the people around them. Right? They mobilized that quality in others to fight for what was good and to make the changes necessary. Be it Franklin Roosevelt or Kennedy.
Yeah. Well, I think, when I think of that, I think of Frederick List being one of the most widely studied economists in China, who comes directly out of the tradition of Abraham Lincoln, of Henry Carey. That tradition of thinking, he comes right out of that. And the Chinese adopted that. Now, exactly how that happened, I don't know, but it's really quite extraordinary that that process was unleashed, and that's what Lin and Helga have intersected over there. And I think it's the role that Lin and Helga have played is absolutely crucial to the way the leadership in China has been sort of developing. Because without Lin's ideas, how would they been able to proceed? Because they don't have it in their history, those ideas of economic development. I mean, from my cursory understanding of Chinese history,
I don't know. It's like
they didn't have a real tradition of political economy. There was a very trading nation. They were very engaged in looking for trading partners, and they had porcelain, and they had rice, and they had other kinds of product. They had gunpowder, they had fireworks, You know, they had a whole bunch of things that they used and traded.
Well, that's I beg to that oversimplifies. You know, up until the Opium War period and so forth, China was the most advanced country in the world, and in terms of per capita standard of living and so forth. And since the mid 1800s, China's was put through the grinder of these empires and wars and the Sino-Japanese War, on and on. That I'm just raising what Janeway Wei raised and presented. So you think of the Grand Canal, you think of other projects that were built. China understood infrastructure, I think, more than than the typical kind of narrative of China having these nice ideas but never being able to put them together. They put them together in a different way. But anyway, I would just emphasize a predisposition to understanding exactly the ideas of List and work.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah,
I'm not trying to.
But that makes sense. I agree with you.
The Chinese, as I read it, were using more steel.
Everyone wanted to say something.
Yeah, behind you.
I'm sorry.
Well, it just was striking me the importance of rallying people behind Lynn. What we're finding, in terms of the in-depth support for LaRouche, because if you take this question, every time the United States has been in trouble because we abandoned our system and started doing things in a financial, monetary way, whether it's the Civil War or under Roosevelt or with Kennedy or whatever, the problem has always been how are you going to get the bankers to give you the money? And I mean, that was Lincoln's problem fighting the Civil War, much less building the Transcontinental Railroad. That was Roosevelt's problem. That was, Kennedy's problem. How are you going to get the bankers to give you the money? And if you have a leader who actually understands not only that you don't have to get the bankers to give you the money, there's a different system of credit from the nation, but who then can rally the population behind that from the standpoint of building a future using those principles, then you can break what appears to be a Gordian knot, or untie it, or whatever you do with this kind of, but without leadership that actually operates on that level and understands that, you're not going to get it. And Lynn has been saying in the last week, I'm available and I'm doing what I have done. And it's talking today as part of this discussion, the importance of him saying that and us conveying that. Because he's the guy that's going to make this thing work. Maybe that personally he's almost 3 weeks from being 95 years old, but as Kesha did not read from that article. Helga said, well, he probably can't go to China. It'd be pretty difficult if he's 94, but it's not impossible.
Yeah, that's right.
Because you think about how people, this question of Congress, I mean, they're not all evil, and they're not all just out for themselves, but they have been beaten into this idea that the money's not there, there's limited resources, there's limited this, there's limited that, and that's the only way things can be done, and we have to break that.
Yeah, and I think that as well, those same people are unaware of how they make decisions or make choices based on the underlying assumptions that they have culturally adopted that have made it impossible for them to see it. I mean, in the crudest sense, think of someone looking at the CrowdStrike report. This is what the VIPs were complaining about, is the CrowdStrike says, oh, we can prove that the Russians did it. Well, how do you know? Well, see, I see this guy with Cyrillic, and I see this guy's name here, who was a former intelligence officer for the Russians. He was a Russian, and the formatting is in Russian, so it must be Russian. Doesn't that make sense? Well, what did the forensicator say? The guy that, how long with this guy, Adam somebody, they decide, well, that wasn't true. Well, what's the difference of someone who just goes along with it? I mean, it's sort of crude because it's so obvious you shouldn't go along with it. But what happened was that this the forensicator looked at this and said, "Oh, it's the Russians." Well, if it was the Russians, why did they want to tell us? Is this something they wanted to make it known? They wanted us to know that they did it? Well, no, this is supposed to be sneaky. So they signed it with their name, you know, and so the forensicator, these people looking at this, you know, the VIPs, they look at it and say, wait a minute, this isn't making any sense at all. There's an intention here that is not what appears on the surface. There's some intention that's there, that's driving this thing. And so the question is distinguishing a truthful process. Looking for the truth. And that's why you've got to be able to constantly reflect on what it is we want in our society, and which has been, said here in various ways about developing the creative potential of every human being. And that creativity is what really, we want to get at. I mean, the thing that Lynn goes after in this article, in the first part of it, is he is constantly developing a thread around the difference between Euclid, right, who is hijacking the work of Heraclitus and Plato and other of the Greek thinkers. Euclid is hijacking it because what Euclid is saying is, we can prove all the ideas that you guys have said by taking these 5 axioms and putting them on paper, and we can construct everything from our 5 axioms. And what Plato says, well, prove it. Prove to me that these axioms are correct. Oh, we can't. They're just self-evident. We just know that. Right? It's like, we just know that Trump's a racist. We know he's a racist.
We don't have to prove it. We just have to get enough people to believe it.
Yeah, right.
It's going to get you to believe that if you don't believe it, you're going to get in trouble.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but it's the that kind of accepting axioms, where what Lynn is after and what Plato is after is physical reality, which is kind of ironic, because Plato talks about the forms. Is that what?
The shadow.
The forms, right, of that underlie the reality, and so you think, oh, but that's kind of mysterious stuff where you can't touch it, you can't taste it, you can't hear it, you can't feel it, and but that's where the real substance is in this process. And so one thing I wanted to do is to because time is getting short here, I wanted to show us a clip from Jason Ross's one of Jason Ross's classes from several years ago, I think 5 years ago actually, and it's a I've been having fun looking at these things because it's fascinating material that he's developing. But in this clip, what I want to show you is how where Kepler's breakthrough on the orbit of Mars comes from. And by way of introduction, I think most of our active members here know the basic idea that Copernicus, Ptolemy, and Brahe, all of them have a system that is basically the same. That they all accurately predict where you're going to see astronomical objects at what time of year. And so they have this system. And what Jonathan is doing here, Jason, I keep saying, I did that to Kesha earlier. I have something's, I guess I'm just old. But what Jason is doing here is showing you how Kepler is breaking the mold of systems that are arbitrary because they work to describe what's going on. And Kepler's saying, well, what's the problem here? So can we show it somehow?
Yeah, okay, so give me a moment.
Is that
This is very hard to do this. Go ahead, go ahead.
oh, okay. The what he talks about, this Mars is moving in a uniform path, right? Is that it's uniform in the sense of the angular rotation. So many angles per second are being, or so many degrees are being passed per second. But when that is this far, the degrees here, this is like, let's say 60 degrees. If that's 60 degrees here, well, that's about an inch to go from there to there, right? So it's, if something goes from here to here and something goes from here to here, this one is going to have to cover more distance in the same time as this guy covers from going from here to here. So this appears to be moving faster. It covers more distance per unit time than this guy does, even though the angular speed is the same. So anyway, I just wanted to make that clear. Is that clear?
It will become clearer.
Okay. Okay. All right. 5 minutes spot. But here's the point, is that just like forensicator would look at the work done by, by the people who downloaded the material from the DNC, and the forensicator would look at it and say, well, why did the Russians tell us that they did it? That's stupid. So therefore, they didn't do it. And here, what Kepler is doing is he's looking at my perfect model, but if I put reality into my model, that is the real distance between Mars and the sun, then my model doesn't work anymore. So what do I do? Well, what do you want? You want a model that shows you where Mars is? If that's what you want, hey, we got 4 of them. Kepler got one, Copernicus had one, Brahe had one, Ptolemy had one. They all work. That's what you want? That's what you got. But if you want to know what it is that's out there, I know how far Mars is from the sun. And if I plug that in, they're all wrong. So what are you going to do? Well, that's what Jonathan makes the point. Jason makes the point. I'm living in the past in a peculiar kind of way. But he makes that point that it's cause. It's not where is the planet going to be, it's what's causing it to be there. And one thing I had wanted to do, but I didn't have time, is I wanted you to think about the idea that suppose that an alien came down from some other galaxy and was able to see the history of human species, over the last 3 million years on the planet, right? And what he would see, he'd see, things like the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age. He'd see water power, coal, oil, nuclear, even, getting up to the moon, mining the moon. But at the same time, he's witnessing that development, or she's witnessing that development. There's constant tribal warfare. There's the Peloponnesian Wars. There's the period in China where they had the, do you remember what that was called? What you're thinking of. War of the States?
Warring.
The Warring States. Yeah, there's a period where there's just nothing but chaos. And then when the dynasties change, it's always forces from the outside coming in, brutalizing the nation, and then they have to sort of put themselves back together. And then, what we had the 30 Years' War, one of the most devastating wars in mankind's history. We had the, of course, the Black Death as a result of the economic collapse, but the 30 Years' War. I mean, in other words, he'd see a whole series of constant warfare. And so, what would he come away with? How could he come away with watching this? Growth and development up to the point of nuclear energy, of being able to mine the moon or whatever. And then these people who are doing this are constantly slaughtering each other. So what's he going to be able to say, or what's he going to have to look at? And it's that kind of notion that what's primary is the hatred, the jealousies, the personal interest that causes the wars. Is that the primary characteristic of human society? Or is there something else that's primary, which underlies this ability to make the discoveries that allows us to move into a future where we can mine the moon and other things, control the solar system, etc. And so that's the kind of thing that I think I've been trying to sort of create a discussion that gets us thinking in a way that if you were to pick up this article and start looking at it, this discussion, I would hope, would help you stay on track with what Lynn's actually developing. And that was the intent here, because you got to read Lynn. You know, you've got to read what he's saying. And if you don't understand what he's doing, then it's hard to get a sense of your own potential role in history or in human society. So you got to read Lynn, and I hope that it contributes to that.
So as we conclude here, I think just to go back to what Pete said, and I wanted to, because I felt that about wanting to leave. I wanted to round out the discussion again about Lynn's commitment to, as you said, and went through the creative potential for mankind. And this, just to go back again to finish off that point by Frederick Douglass, because I think it's important, and I think it really rounds off exactly what Pete was just getting at the very end. So I'll finish the quote here because I didn't want to leave the quote hanging. The quote continues in honor of Abraham Lincoln as follows. Abraham Lincoln was clear in his duty and had an oath in heaven. He calmly and bravely heard the voice of doubt and fear all around him. But he had an oath in heaven, and there was not power enough on earth to make this honest boatman, backwoodsman, and broad-handed splinter of rails evade or violate that sacred oath. He had not been schooled in the ethics of slavery. His plain life had favored his love of truth. He had not been taught that treason and perjury were the proof of honor and honesty. His moral training was against his saying one thing when he meant another. The trust that Abraham Lincoln had in himself and in the people was surprising and grand, and it was also enlightened and well-founded. He knew the American people better than they knew themselves, and his truth was based upon his knowledge. And I mean, it just really goes back to what we're talking about, is that we have to, we actually have to fight for the defense of truth, and to get to the idea of what is truth, what is the creative power of mankind to know that which governs the principles which govern our universe, to know what it is that is our oath with the Creator to actually continue the process of creation. And that's what we're discussing here. That's what Mr. LaRouche knows best. That's what the commitment toward exploring the solar system, to actually freeing mankind so they can develop new forms of science and technologies, and to actually be free from the Zeusian enslavement. So I think that very sentence or quote there characterizes exactly what the intention of Lincoln was, and what the intention of Lyndon LaRouche is, to continue to foster the progress of freedom and creativity for all mankind, and to make sure that every single individual understands what their, as we've just discussed here in this whole period, you know, what their oath to in heaven is. So, you know, everyone else has to take, as Douglass understood that Lincoln did, that very oath. And so I think that we can end with that, and make sure that this next week we really go full thrust ahead in this fight to defend this country and against this empire, and to make sure that we bring the United States into that new paradigm, which is awaiting for us to join it right now. So that's the exciting thing. That's what we can be happy and proud about. And we got lots of ammunition, tools for success, for helping us to do that we just went through here. So we'll end with that.